You wake up, not because your body is rested, but because your heart is heavy. It's another day, another morning where the first thing you feel isn't gratitude or joy, but weight. The weight of being unseen, unheard, unremembered. And the hardest part? You don't even know who you would talk to about it, because you've already tried, and nothing changed. There are moments in life where you scream inside, but nothing echoes back, not from people, not from the heavens. You pray, but it feels like your words dissolve midair, like they never even reached past the ceiling. And then, the doubts creep in. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, slow, poisonous. You start to wonder, did God forget me? Most people will never admit it, but this feeling of divine abandonment is more common than we think. You might walk through a crowd, go to church, sit at a family table, and still feel like the forgotten one, not in their eyes, in His. And when that thought plants itself deep in the soul, it doesn't just break your spirit. It starts to unwrite your identity. What does it mean when you feel abandoned by the very one who promised to never leave you? Some call it a crisis of faith. Others call it spiritual warfare. But those words feel too sterile, too clinical for what it really is. It's a loneliness that feels cosmic. It's when you believe in God, love Him, serve Him, and yet feel like He's turned His back. Not out of punishment, not even out of anger, but out of absence. And absence is the most terrifying form of rejection. And so you begin to fold inward. You stop expecting. You stop praying with boldness. You go through the motion, not because you stopped believing, but because it hurts too much to hope. There's something nobody tells you, that some of the holiest people in Scripture had that same fear. The fear of being forgotten by the one they trusted the most. King David cried, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever?" Job, in the pit of suffering, begged for an answer from a silent sky. Even Jesus, yes, Jesus on the cross, in His most human moment, shouted, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This isn't a weakness. It's not a flaw in your faith. It's a place, a spiritual place, a valley where the soul walks blind, with nothing to hold on to but breath. And some of the most sacred truths are only revealed in this wilderness. Because when you lose the illusion of being in control, that's when you discover whether your faith was in comfort or in God. Now pause, breathe, look back on the last time you really, deeply felt remembered, not by people, but by heaven. Maybe it was a whisper of peace that came out of nowhere, a random verse that popped up, a song that played at just the right moment, something so small it would be easy to dismiss, but something in you knew it was meant for you. That's not coincidence. That's the trace of a God who hasn't left, a God who sees you, even when you don't see Him. And then there's this verse, Isaiah 49:14-16, hidden in plain sight, rarely preached, rarely quoted. But it exists for one reason, to respond to the cry that says, "God has forgotten me." Zion said, "The Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgotten me." And God answered, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands, engraved, not written in ink, not carved in stone, engraved into flesh. Let that settle in. Your name, your essence, your existence, engraved into the hands that hold galaxies, into the hands that bled for humanity, into the hands that reached out in storms, in healing, in resurrection. This isn't metaphor. This is intimacy. You're not forgotten. You're etched. You are not abandoned. You're remembered in a way no human memory could match. The world forgets. People forget. Time forgets. But God, He doesn't just remember. He inscribes. And that means right now, even in your silence, even in your invisible tears, even when you've stopped asking, He sees, He hears, He holds. He hasn't walked away. He hasn't looked away. He hasn't erased you from His plans. You were never a backup plan. You were never forgotten. You were never invisible to Him, because those hands that hold the stars have always held your name. There's something profound about the silence of pain. It doesn't always scream. It doesn't always ask for help. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the soul, building walls that even the closest people in your life can't see through. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that you're struggling, but that no one seems to notice. So you move through your days like a shadow of yourself. You smile when expected. You say, "I'm fine," even when everything inside you feels broken and disconnected. And at night, when you're finally alone with your own thoughts, it hits you like a wave. That question again, did God forget me? But the truth is, feeling forgotten is not the same as being forgotten. Let's talk about that. There are seasons in your life where heaven feels like it's gone silent. You don't hear answers. You don't feel direction. You don't sense God's presence the way you once did. It's like He's hidden behind a veil, watching but not responding. And in those moments, your faith doesn't need noise. It needs memory. Memory of what He already promised. That's where Isaiah 49:16 becomes more than it becomes a reminder. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands, not temporarily, not conditionally, not until you mess up, but forever. Think about the word engraved, not written, not drawn, engraved. That takes pressure, intention, permanence. To engrave something, you have to wound the surface, you have to pierce it. And that's the image God uses to describe how deeply He holds you. Not in His mind, not even just in His heart, but in His hands, hands that carry the scars of love. When you feel forgotten, God says, "Look at my hands." This imagery isn't poetic fluff. It's divine architecture. Because the same hands that engraved your name are the hands that reached for Peter when he was drowning. They are the hands that broke the bread when thousands were hungry. They are the hands that gently touched lepers when everyone else pulled away. And yes, they are the hands that were nailed to a cross for sins they never committed. Not one of those moments was accidental, and neither is your life. When God says you are engraved in His hands, He's saying, "I carry you in everything I do." You don't need to see proof of that every day. You don't need lightning bolts or miracles to validate your worth. The engraving is the evidence. It's already there. But let's go deeper. Isaiah doesn't stop with the engraving. The verse continues, "Your walls are ever before me." What walls? In ancient times, walls were the protection, the pride, and the identity of a city. When a wall was broken, it symbolized vulnerability, shame, and defeat. So when God says, "Your walls are always before me," He's saying, "I'm aware of every place where you feel unprotected, exposed, and weak." He's not avoiding your brokenness. He's staring right at it. Every crack in your emotional armor, every breach in your confidence, every moment where you feel like something inside you has collapsed. He sees it all. And not with disappointment, with compassion. So if you've felt like no one understands how fragile you've become lately, know this: God has never stopped looking. He's never stopped noticing. He's never stopped remembering. Your pain is not buried under someone else's priorities. Your prayers aren't buried under the noise of the world. You are always before Him. And here's the most beautiful part. Sometimes God lets silence stretch, not because He's far, but because He's forming something in you that only silence can shape. He's strengthening your root system underground, where no one can see. He's building a depth of trust that isn't based on feelings, but on faith. He's drawing you into a place where intimacy is no longer about blessing, but about presence. Let me tell you something sacred. Some of God's greatest affirmations come wrapped in hidden seasons where nothing looks like it's working, where everyone else seems to be thriving, and you're just surviving. Where you start to wonder if you missed something, if maybe He's blessing others because they're better, more spiritual, more worthy. But that's a lie. What you don't realize is that hidden seasons are not punishment. They are preparation. You're not forgotten. You're being reserved, set apart, trained in silence so you can speak in storms. The delay is not denial, it's design. Think of Joseph, forgotten in a prison years after a divine dream. Think of Moses, wandering in a desert long before leading a nation. Think of Hannah, crying in a temple waiting for a child that everyone told her wouldn't come. They all felt forgotten. But what was really happening? God was carving their names into his story. And that's what he's doing with you. You are not invisible. You're being cultivated. You are not lost. You're being led. You are not abandoned. You're being engraved. So hold on to this truth, not just with your mind, but with your soul. The God who holds the stars has your name in his hands, not because you begged for it, but because he chose you before you even knew to ask. One of the hardest places to be in your faith journey is standing between memory and promise, remembering what God once said, but not seeing any sign of it coming true. That space, that tension, is where many people lose their strength. It's not that they stop believing in God. It's that they quietly start to believe that maybe his promises were never really meant for them. And it usually doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. You start with hope, real hope. You believe, you pray, you show up, you speak life over your future. But over time, when nothing changes, the voice in your head starts to shift. It says things like, maybe I misunderstood, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe God is just too busy for me. And that's when despair creeps in, not as a loud announcement, but as a whisper. So you retreat, not physically maybe, but spiritually. You stop expecting, you stop dreaming, you stop asking, not because you're angry, but because you're tired of the silence that follows. And somewhere in that exhaustion, a lie takes root. If God really cared, I wouldn't feel this forgotten. But that's where the enemy plays his greatest trick. He convinces you that silence means absence. That delay means denial, that what you're feeling is final. And it's not. In fact, some of the most powerful people in the Bible went through this exact stage. It was not their strength that defined them. It was their ability to keep walking even when heaven was quiet. Let's talk about David, the man after God's own heart, the anointed king, the warrior, poet, leader, and giant slayer, but also the man who cried in caves. The man who said in Psalm 13, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" David was not just a conqueror. He was a man who knew the taste of abandonment, the ache of waiting, and the sting of feeling invisible to heaven. And yet, God never left him. God didn't remove the cave. He filled it. God didn't always stop the enemies. He strengthened David in their presence. God didn't fast-track his crown. He formed him for it. You see, we often want a miracle when what we really need is formation. And formation happens in the dark. It happens when no one is applauding, when you're not being promoted, when the phone doesn't ring, when the answers don't come. That's when character is shaped. That's when faith is forged. And here's something most people never consider. Maybe the very reason you feel forgotten is because you've been hidden intentionally by the hand of God. Not hidden to be punished, hidden to be protected. Protected from premature exposure, protected from people who don't see your value yet, protected from environments that would dilute your calling. Think of a seed. The moment it is planted, it enters darkness. It gets buried beneath dirt. There is no applause, no audience, just pressure and silence. And yet, it is in that place, unseen and forgotten, that life begins to break open. Roots go deep, foundations form. And eventually, when the time is right, that seed bursts through the soil, strong enough to reach the sun. You, my friend, are in that stage. It's not punishment, it's preparation. You are not being buried, you are being planted. But here's where it gets even more personal. Isaiah 49 doesn't just say you're engraved on his hands. It says your walls are ever before him. That word again, walls. In ancient culture, walls were more than structure. They were identity. They represented protection, strength, reputation. And when those walls were torn down, it wasn't just a physical loss. It was emotional devastation. So if you felt like your walls have collapsed, like everything you thought would hold you up has broken, you need to know that God sees that too. Not in judgment, in compassion. He sees the relationships that didn't hold, the dreams that fell apart, the career paths that closed, the family that fractured. He sees every stone, every brick of who you used to be, lying in pieces, and he doesn't look away. He kneels, he gathers, he rebuilds. But this time, it's not just about restoring what you had. It's about constructing what you need. Stronger walls, deeper foundation, a spiritual identity that isn't built on what people say or what seasons bring, but on a truth that does not shake. Let me tell you what that truth is. You are not forgotten. You are engraved. You are not invisible. You are in His hands. You are not disqualified. You are being prepared for something that your pain is actually shaping. And that doesn't mean the pain disappears. It just means it has purpose. So tonight, if you find yourself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking God, "Where are you?" remember this. The same God who counted your tears in the night is the one who already planned your sunrise. And the sunrise is coming, even if you don't see it yet. Even if you're still surrounded by darkness. Because in the kingdom of God, nothing is wasted. Not your pain, not your waiting, not your wandering. Every second is accounted for. Every tear is bottled. Every whisper is heard. You don't have to scream for God to listen. You just have to trust that His hands don't let go. And maybe, just maybe, that feeling of being forgotten was the very signal that He's closer than ever. There's a quiet kind of suffering that most people carry. The kind you can't put into words because it doesn't scream. It simmers. It waits in the silence between texts that never come, in the unanswered prayers, in the gap between who you used to be and the person you're struggling to become. And in that space, people often begin to lose themselves, not because they stopped believing in God, but because they started believing that God stopped noticing them, but He didn't. One of the most extraordinary verses that speak directly to this hidden pain is Isaiah 49:16. "See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hand." Not written, not drawn, engraved. You don't engrave things that don't matter. You engrave what you never want to forget. This isn't poetic imagery. In ancient cultures, slaves would sometimes tattoo the names of their masters on their bodies. But this verse reverses that. Here, it is the master who engraves the name of the servant on his own hands. It's as if God is saying, "You will never be out of my sight because I have permanently marked myself with you." And yet, how often do we live like we're unwanted? Like we're accidental? Like we have to earn God's attention with performance or perfection? That mindset doesn't just damage our view of God. It destroys our ability to receive love. Because if you think you have to work for love, you'll always be tired. If you think you have to deserve grace, you'll never feel clean. And if you think you have to beg for God's presence, you'll never feel safe in the silence. So what does it mean that your name is engraved on His hand? It means you are not a prayer He forgot to answer. It means your pain did not slip past Him while He was busy with someone else's miracle. It means you've never sat alone, even in your darkest room, without being surrounded by the very hands that shape the stars. And that matters, especially when the world tells you otherwise. Because the world has a formula. If you're successful, you're worthy. If you're loved, you're valuable. If you're seen, you're enough. But God reverses the formula entirely. In His eyes, you were worthy before the success. You were valuable before the validation. You were enough before anyone else noticed. Because His eyes saw you when you were being formed in secret, when your soul was being knitted together in a womb not even your mother fully understood. And He has never looked away. That's why you still feel Him, even when you can't explain it. That's why, in the middle of breakdowns, you sometimes catch your breath and wonder, why do I still have hope? Hope doesn't come from facts. It doesn't come from circumstances. It comes from being remembered. And God remembers. He remembers who you are when you forget. He remembers what He placed inside of you when fear makes you question your worth. He remembers the promises He whispered to you on nights when the world was silent, but your soul was wide awake. And here's where it gets even deeper. The hands that hold your name, those are the same hands that were pierced. Which means the scars Jesus carries are not just proof of His suffering. They are reminders of his choice. He chose to carry pain so that yours would have purpose. He chose to be broken so that you would be whole. He chose to be abandoned so that you would never actually be alone. So when you feel forgotten, look at his scars. When you feel invisible, remember, your name is not on a list, not in a file, not on a scroll, but carved into eternity. God doesn't forget what he engraved. He doesn't erase what he claims. And he certainly doesn't walk away from what he died to redeem. And sometimes, when life gets quiet, when everything slows down, it's not abandonment, it's invitation. He is inviting you back to the place where you realize your worth doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be received. You are not in a season of delay. You are in a season of detail. God is not punishing you with stillness. He is preparing you with strategy. He is not hiding from you. He is hiding you from distractions, from detours, from anything that would cheapen the glory he's building in your life. But let's get real. It's hard to believe all this when you're still crying at night, when you're still facing bills with no income, when you're still praying for healing that hasn't come. That's when this message matters the most. Because faith isn't pretending everything is fine. Faith is trusting that everything matters, even when it doesn't feel good. Faith is looking at unanswered prayers and believing they are still being processed in the heavens. Faith is whispering, "I believe," through clenched teeth and sleepless nights. And God honors that. He doesn't need your perfection. He wants your permission to come close, to speak gently, to remind you that you are not just seen, you are known. So if today feels too heavy, if your soul feels numb, if your heart is tired of hoping, let this be your reminder. You were not forgotten. You were engraved, and nothing, no failure, no silence, no delay can change that. There's something powerful about permanence. In a world where everything seems to fade, memories, relationships, even identities, the idea that something could be forever feels both sacred and foreign. And yet, this is exactly what God promises when he says your name is engraved on his hands. It's not a metaphor of affection. It's a declaration of permanence, a divine decision that you are worth remembering, not just in passing, but eternally. But why does that matter so much? Because most people are not afraid of pain. They're afraid of pain that no one sees. They're not afraid of being tired. They're afraid of being tired and still expected to smile. They're not afraid of falling. They're afraid of falling and being forgotten. This fear of spiritual invisibility is real. It shows up in the way we pretend to be okay, in the way we withdraw quietly, hoping someone notices, but terrified they won't. It shows up in the way we pray prayers we don't believe anymore, just to convince ourselves that we haven't lost the connection. But God doesn't need your performance. He doesn't need your filters. He doesn't wait for your perfect language before he answers. He already knows the words behind your silence. He sees the breaking before the tear falls. And most importantly, he stays, even when you don't know how to feel him, even when you doubt whether he's listening, even when you scream into the night and hear nothing back but your own echo. He's there, not as an idea, but as a presence, a whisper, a stillness that holds you when no one else does. There's a hidden beauty in suffering when it's placed in God's hands, because his hands don't just carry your name, they carry understanding. Remember, those same hands healed the blind, lifted the dead, calmed the storm, but they also held nails. So when you feel like your wounds disqualify you, remember, Jesus didn't hide his. He showed them, and he used them as proof that love doesn't avoid pain. It redeems it. That's why your scars don't scare him. That's why your questions don't offend him. That's why your doubts don't disqualify you. You are not too broken to be used. You are not too confused to be seen. You are not too far to be reached. In fact, the very place where you feel most forgotten might be the exact place God is preparing to reveal his presence. Not through lightning, not through loud answers, but through closeness, through moments so personal that no one else would recognize them, but you will. Like the time you almost gave up, but something told you to hold on just one more day. Like the time you felt completely unloved, but someone unexpectedly reminded you of your worth. Like the verse you stumbled on by accident, but it said exactly what you couldn't say out loud. These are not coincidence. These are breadcrumbs from a God who has never lost track of you. He knows what season you're in, even if you don't. He knows what you're carrying, even when you can't name it. And He knows how to reach your heart in a language only your soul understands. But here's the part we rarely talk about. Sometimes, to truly feel remembered by God, we have to stop hiding from ourselves. Because it's hard to feel God's embrace when you're still pretending not to be bleeding. It's hard to hear His voice when you've been silencing your own. And it's hard to believe you're engraved on His hands when you've convinced yourself you're unworthy of being held. This is where healing begins, not in fixing everything, but in facing the truth that you are not forgotten and never have been. That your story, even the parts you hate, even the nights you don't talk about, even the chapters you want erased, is known by the one who holds the pen. And He's still writing. He hasn't closed your book. He hasn't sealed your fate. He hasn't said, "This one's too far gone." No, He says, "This one is mine." See, and if you've been waiting for a sign that your life still matters, that your faith still counts, that your prayers were not wasted, this is it. Because the very breath you're using to listen right now is proof. Proof that you are still part of something sacred. Proof that heaven hasn't moved on from you. Proof that your pain has a place, not to be hidden, but to be healed. Let that truth breathe inside you for a moment. Let it shake the dust off your soul. Let it interrupt the lies that say you're too late, too lost, too small. You are engraved. That means you are anchored in divine memory. It means you are not floating alone in a spiritual abyss, hoping someone finds you. It means there is a plan that still includes your name, your healing, your purpose. So don't just survive your silence. Start listening to it. Because often, when God seems most quiet, He's actually the most intentional. He's not ignoring you. He's preparing you. And He's bringing you to a place where the only voice you need to hear is His. And when you do, you'll know that being remembered by God was never about being popular, perfect, or even strong. It was about being real. It was about surrender. It was about letting go of the version of yourself you built to be loved and embracing the version He already loved before the beginning of time. That's the invitation today, to stop waiting for a sign in the sky and start believing the engraving on His hands, because that mark, it wasn't put there by chance. It was placed there for you, to remind you always, you are seen, you are safe, you are His.